Welcome to the Tennessee Native Plant Society's Native Plant Seminar Series, which has now been going on. We're in our third year of doing this, and most events seem to be well attended. Tonight, we're welcoming Todd Crabtree, who will be talking about rare plants and plant communities of Southeast Tennessee. Todd is the Tennessee State botanist and a member of the Tennessee Natural Heritage Program. He will be speaking about some of our very rare plants and their plant communities in the Southeast. Todd is also a longtime member of TNPS. He's former vice president and he's a former member of the board. He also serves as field trip leader for TNPS and other organizations, including, I'm sure, some of the state activities, the state parks and such. So we are being recorded. You will be able to see this for a rerun, or if you need to leave early before everything is finished, you can always come back and catch up. If everybody would please hold your questions until the end, or you can write them down in the chat. If you're afraid you're going to forget them, put them in the chat box. That's at the very bottom of your screen. There's a little place with a spot that says chat, and we already have 2 messages there. So without further ado, I'm going to say welcome, Todd. And let's get you up and running here so we can see your screen, if you're ready for that. And there we go.
Got it?
We've got it. Lovely.
All right, here we go. Rare plants of southeastern Tennessee and their associated plant communities. A lot of people may not be familiar with the concept of plant communities. Ecologists study plant communities, and our division maps some rare plant communities, good examples of those. So this is sort of an introduction to the connection between rare plants and those plant communities. This is a map of Tennessee with the physiographic provinces, and primarily what I'm going to be talking about is that southern part of the Eastern Highland Rim and the Cumberland Plateau, Coffee, Grundy, Franklin, and Marion counties. So here's a lot of words. Don't have to read those all. I've highlighted the key features of this: the Central Interior Highlands, Calcareous Glade, and Barrens. And I have a link to NatureServe Explorer at the end if you want to look in it, if you're really curious about this and you want to look it up. The main thing here is these 2 grasses are characteristic in white, big blue stem and side oats grama grass. And then blue ash can occur at the boundary, some asters and blazing stars. And in a few decades ago, or like 12 years ago, the Nature Conservancy and the Division of Natural Areas Natural Heritage Program had a project where we went through the rare plant list and listed the plant communities that those rare plants preferred. And there are other categories, but one of the categories was preferred. And what this map shows is rare plant records of those species that prefer the Central Interior Highlands, Calcareous Glades, and Barrens. And you can see they're in West Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, East Tennessee. And there's even one up on the plateau. So that's not a Calcareous Glade and Barrens, but that is a species that prefers that habitat. And it prefers others, obviously, because it's not in that. It's up on the sandstone. Here is a Calcareous Glade and Barren that Dr. Dwayne Estes introduced myself and some other botanists to in Franklin County. This one's very grassy. Others are not this grassy. They have some forbs, but that's what they look like on the ground. And there's one behind me in this picture, and I'm standing in front of an ancient post oak. This is another forest that can occur around these glades and barrens, is a post oak woodland. And this is an aerial view of one of those glades. It's really small, but there are 7 of our state listed species in this one little glade. So that first picture I showed you, I don't know that there's any rare plants in that glade. This one has 7. So it's really variable whether or not rare plants show up in these. They're either there or they're not. Here's one of those rare plants, the white prairie clover. It's mainly a Midwestern plant, but it's in a few counties in Tennessee, and I think it gets into North Georgia, North Alabama. It's not globally rare. It's not one of our rarest plants in Tennessee. It has a special concern status. In the really open areas, it can be abundant, one of the dominants in the herb layer, as in these photos. The western sunflower is another species, mostly from across the Mississippi River. This one gets, it doesn't flower a lot. What you mostly see is these rosettes of leaves on the ground. Gets up about 2 to 3 feet high at the most. The flower does. And then the upland white aster, which is technically a goldenrod. You see 2 scientific names at the top there. I prefer the oligoneuron, but that's not the accepted name at this point. This one is state endangered. It's another Midwestern species that comes over into Tennessee. It's not globally rare. The Ontario blazing star. This one is a little less rare than the previous one. It's threatened in the state. And this is, again, another Midwestern, a little more of an eastern range than those others that we just saw. And then the Great Plains ladies' tresses by Ranthes magnacamporum does occur in some of these glades and barrens. It's not as common globally as those other species we just looked at. It's state endangered. And I suspect Dennis will talk about this more in his talk later in the year on orchids, but there's some work going on right now in this group. Dr. Matthew Pace is continuing the work of Dr. Shiviak and others trying to sort out what these spiranthes are. So maybe we'll know a little bit more about that once the specimens and seeds that Dennis and Jim Allison and I have collected get processed. Looking forward to seeing how that comes out. The tansy rosinweed also occurs in that one little glade. The global rank, you'll say, is G3Q. So if you believe that this is a species, it's a G3 species, but some taxonomists don't think this is a species. It's just variation within another species. Nevertheless, it is recognized in Tennessee and it is state threatened. This is not a plant, but if you're going to be in these habitats, you need to be watching out for rattlesnakes. I don't see them frequently in that habitat, but it's not uncommon to see them. And I didn't see this one until a squirrel told me about it. And the squirrel was making some noise that didn't sound like the noise that they make when humans are around. So I started looking around and I saw this under a boulder. Next community is one I'm pretty sure most people have seen. If you've been out to Savage Gulf or Fiery Gizzard, you go out to an overlook, this is what you see. It's rocky sandstone. One of the characteristic species is this Liatris microcephalus, the small-headed blazing star. There will be shrubs and small Virginia pines. But the actual community begins just to the right of what you're seeing in this picture. Start seeing some grasses and things. That's the community I'm talking about. And this is the silverling, Paronychia argyricoma, G4 rank, globally threatened in Tennessee. And if this looks like an alpine plant to you, it's because it kind of is. It runs up the Appalachians. There's actually two varieties. There's a gap in the range, and then it picks up again in the far northeast. But it's rock outcrop mountain thing. Has some interesting tiny little flowers. I've seen pollinators I don't recognize. I think they're small wasps on this plant. Yeah, one thing about this is you have to be careful because it is near these drop-offs. If you're looking at this plant, you need to pay attention to that edge. This is down in the Eastern Highland Rim, dropping down off of the plateau. This community is characterized more for its form than the actual composition of plants. You'll see that last statement. The herbaceous layer is widely variable depending on geography, but these are natural depressions and ponds. And they do contain some of our rare plants. And this is the same concept as that other one. This is from the project with the Nature Conservancy, where we tied the communities to the rare plants. So these little red dots up and down the Eastern Highland Rim are where those rare plants are found. So you could expect that at least most of those you would find a depression pond. And then this other one up in the Western Highland Rim or Pennyroyal Plain, that's another pond. And this is one of the plants in those systems. It's common along the coastal plain. It's not a clear disjunct, which means there's a break in the range between the sites in Tennessee and the true coastal plain. But it's rare in between the coastal plain, like from mid-Georgia up to Tennessee. It's just not common. And then it shows up in Tennessee. Not globally rare again. We think it's a G5, but it's some doubt on there, the question mark. You rarely see it flowering. I found it flowering once. Got a lot of pictures. It's very clonal, I guess. It can cover a shallow pond, but in the deeper ponds, in the true coastal plain, it just appears as a ring around the edge of the pond at a certain depth of the water, but in the shallow ponds, it can just fill them up. Virginia chain fern, special concern in Tennessee. And this one, we're just really at the northern part of its range in the middle of the country. It's not a disjunct, so it's pretty much continuous range all the way down to the coastal plain. And again, it's in those big true coastal plain ponds down in Georgia, it is in a certain zone around those larger ponds. But in our sites, it's really in the shallow ponds and can cover a lot of ground. The grassleaf arrowhead occurs out in the water in these ponds, state threatened, not globally rare. Difficult to find. There's a little white flower in that picture, but if you don't have that little white flower, all you see is these leaves, which you could mistake for grass, thus the name grassleaf arrowhead. This is an interesting plant, the Carolina redroot, common on the coastal plain. It is a pretty distinct disjunct, so there's a break in the range between the Tennessee sites and the true coastal plain sites. State endangered. Not sure what the function of this fuzz on the outside of the flowers is, but that could be to protect it from the heat of the sun. Could be some insulation for those flowers. the iris leaf yellow-eyed grass. You'll see a bunch of letters and numbers on the global rank. This is another one that recent treatments just use Xyris, treated as a species, Xyris iridifolia. Either way, it's iris leaf yellow-eyed grass. It's somewhere between a G4 and a G5, state threatened. This is what the whole plant looks like in one of those ponds that's starting to dry out towards the end of the summer. And then here's the iris leaves of the iris leaf yellow-eyed grass. If you see a Xyris, it has leaves this wide in Tennessee, it's going to be this species. There's some others on the coastal plain that get leaves that are almost this wide, but in Tennessee, if you see those kinds of leaves on a Xyris, that's the rare one. This is a grass that a number of botanists, including myself, walked right by at a site in Coffee County. And this is one of those sites where there's a lot of interesting plants. So you're looking at all those, and then it takes a few trips before you realize there's some other things around. So I discovered this in 2011. It was not known from the state before then. Looked over, looking at all those interesting plants, and then see this grass that looked familiar. I'd actually seen this in Georgia. That was kind of an exciting day. And grasses, as you can see from these pictures, do not need showy flowers to attract pollinators. They're wind pollinated, so all they need is expose those reproductive parts to the wind. Wind carries pollen to the stamen, the structures on the grass. And there's a lot going on here, but this is just to illustrate these ponds look like there's kind of one thing or maybe three things. There's actually a lot of different plants. These are very diverse habitats. Botanists get excited when they get to a site like this, and you can see a few of those are those rare plants, the maiden cane, the Xyris, and the Carolina redroot. And here's a shot that's not cluttered with all the names. This pale green thing is water target. It's not a rare plant, but you'll see it dominating in some deep ponds and small lakes up on the plateau, and I think on the coastal plain as well, or on the Eastern Highland Rim, excuse me. So just up slope or up gradient from these ponds is the Eastern Highland Rim prairie and barrens. A lot of diversity in these. In this community, the grass that's underlined there is a characteristic. So one of the rare plants is a characteristic of the system or the community. They are suffering because of lack of fire. They're starting to get trees in them, and see more about that in a little while. Again, this is the Nature Conservancy project where we tied rare plants to their communities, and you can see there are a lot of rare plants that prefer the Eastern Highland Rim prairie and barrens. They also prefer some other types of communities. But if we go to the next level in that classification of that project, you'll see a little difference. Exclusively preferred, which means if you find one of these rare plants, you're going to be in an Eastern Highland Rim prairie and barrens. So you can see that cluster of red dots. That's the high density of Eastern Highland Rim prairie and barrens. And I'm going to go through some of the reasons for that. But first, here's a map, a county map. And if you know where your Tennessee geography, Coffee County is showing up dark green, and that means there are a lot of rare species. This is the number of rare species in these counties. Going from red with least, well, going from Crockett County with none to green with the least, and red with, green with the most, and red with not as much. And if you look at number of rare plant sites, Coffee County still's very high on the scale. and that's because of the Eastern Highland Rim Prairie and Barrens. There's a tiny little square right here in this map showing the Eastern Highland Rim, and that's what I'm about to zoom to, or the area. This is a watershed map of the Duck River watershed. So these little squiggly lines are where the river and its tributaries run. And this distant eastern area is where you start to get those flat, not quite level areas where Eastern Highland Rim Prairie and Barrens are located. Another map, that little square in the same place, and this little green blob is May Prairie State Natural Area. Some of you probably know the story. I'm just going to go over the beginning of that story. Ed Klepsch, when he was a young man, and some other botanists were collecting very heavily to replenish the herbarium at UT, which many years earlier had been destroyed in a fire. So a lot of historic specimens were just gone. So they were trying to get the herbarium numbers back up and get a representation of the flora of Tennessee. They stopped at this Prairie Cafe in Manchester, happened to ask, why is it called the Prairie Cafe? And they said, well, it's the prairie behind the building here. And they went in and were just amazed and were collecting lots of these rare plants. This is a 1940 aerial photo of what it looked like. You can already see some human use, excuse me, of the site, this big square, but it's been kept open, which is why those plants were still around. And so these areas are kind of flat, but you've got two different habitats, really, Eastern Highland Rim Prairie and Barrens. So those prairies are wet prairies, and that's areas in this Guthrie soil that restrict water flow. But that Guthrie soil is not continuous in that fragipan or compacted layer. Some areas that slow down the water a lot more than others. And so you get these differing habitats, wet, dry, wet, dry. This is what's called a digital elevation map. These white areas are the high spots. The dark areas are the low spots. You go from elevation from dark to light. And again, here's May Prairie outlined. So this is what you get if you run a spatial analysis, which gives you the curvature of the terrain. So if it's blue, it's concave, like a concave mirror. So those are the low areas. And then the ones that are not blue are the convex areas. So it's just rolling terrain up and down, up and down. And this is what May Prairie looks like on a good day. This is from a TNPS trip. The natural area was designated in 1973. So this is the 50th anniversary, and I'm leading 3 hikes this year to May Prairie as part of that 50th anniversary. In 1974, it was designated as a National Natural Landmark. It was purchased from the owner in 1975, and it was purchased using funds, the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And the reason it was purchased, and it's part of that agreement, was for the future use of the property will be for preservation, interpretation, and scientific study. And thankfully, all of that is happening. And this interpretation is what's going on in the TNPS field trip. And here's some of the plants from Eastern Highland Rim Prairie and Barrens. There's some sundews. These are carnivorous plants. If you didn't know, Tennessee has carnivorous plants. Spoonleaf sundew and dwarf sundew. Dwarf sundew's a little more rare in Tennessee than the spoonleaf. And I think you can see why they call it the spoon leaf. This looks like a wooden, if it were brown, it would look like a wooden spoon, but these little tendrils, when an insect lands on it, they curl up and it digests the insect for some protein that it is not able to extract from the soil because the soil is acidic and the chemistry is just not there for them to absorb the nutrients it needs. So it supplements its diet with insects. Justice weed, it's a eupatorium, another coastal plain plant. This one's another disjunct. Tennessee, you'll see a lot more of this down in Georgia and other coastal plain states. The dwarf huckleberry, this only gets about 8 inches high. Rarely see it flowering. This is one that hopefully we're going to see more flowering, and I have seen more flowering after our prescribed fires in these habitats. This was from actually from a site in Van Buren County on the plateau where it was being maintained as open on a regular basis and actually fruited and flowered. It's threatened in Tennessee, but I keep finding more and more of this. This one may need to be evaluated in years. I don't know how many more I've found. I just know I keep finding more sites. Eggert's sunflower. This was federally listed or had a federal status. Since delisted, it does really well with management. It's a pretty robust plant once it gets happy. So not as difficult to delist as some of the other species on the federal list. Named after Henry Eggert, a botanist, a German botanist who moved to the United States and was based around St. Louis, Missouri. The Blackfoot quillwort, so those low areas that extend into the forest turn into little flatwood streams, they call them. And these quillworts are, used to call them a fern relative. I think they're just putting them in with ferns right now. And I don't want to mislead you. This photo of the plant in the water could be another species, Isoetes engelmannii, but they look very much alike, grow in the same type of habitat. And here's a showy one. If you were hoping for a showy flower after all those quillworts and things, this is the slender blue iris. This is another one that should benefit more with our prescribed fires. There's a lot of vegetative plants. I found a new site last year in Coffee County, nothing but vegetative plants. This one's out there, still hanging on, but needs some management. And this is a not showy plant. This is a shortleaf skeleton grass that was mentioned as a characteristic of the Eastern Highland Rim Prairie and Barrens. You can just barely see something that looks kind of like a Ferris wheel with lots of spokes here. That's the fruiting structure of the grass. Special concern in Tennessee. If you pick that up, look at it from the side, you got these structures that radiate out from the side, and then towards the end of that, there are spikelets. This is where the flowers and fruit are. So on each one of these, there's just a group of spikelets way out towards the end. And this is how you identify this, separate it from common species that we have in Tennessee. If it's those spikelets start near midway, it's the common one. If they start out maybe a third towards the end or a third from the end, it's the rare one in Tennessee. There's another species on the coastal plain that has not been found in Tennessee, so we don't have to worry about keying that one out. The marsh pea, which is not a coastal plain disjunct, this is a northern species, shows up in some of the wet prairies where they are sort of shaded on the south side. So it has a little microclimate within the May Prairie. and other wet prairies. That's not globally rare, but special concern in Tennessee, so we're still tracking it. There's the leaves. It is a pea that just climbs on other plants out in the prairie. Grasses and forbs. Canby's lobelia is another coastal plain species, and over the years we just kept finding more and more of this on the plateau and the eastern Highland Rim. So this is was formerly threatened. This is not. I still add records for this so that we know where they are. I can kind of still keep track of it, but this is not on our rare plant list. The New Jersey muley. This is not a coastal plain disjunct. It's got a strange distribution. It's in Tennessee, I think North Georgia, a couple of counties maybe, and some counties in North Carolina, and then New Jersey. So it's these sort of three areas of distribution. And then Svensson, one of the early botanists that collected in Tennessee, he said on the eastern Highland Rim near Manchester, there were turfs of this. So this was a lot more plentiful in those days. Collected in the late 1800s, maybe early 1900s. And not something that just jumps out at you. Again, this is one of those, you go to a rare plant site and see all the cool things and get used to seeing those and then start investigating these grasses. Swamp lousewort, another one of those that grows in the wet areas of the prairie and barrens. If you're familiar with the lousewort of the woods, spring wildflower, has red or yellow flowers, grows in the woods, embankments, sometimes above creeks and rivers. This one's much larger, can get 2 to 3 feet high. And the flowers are much larger too. The sand cherry, this has been separated into several taxa, varieties, or species, depending on who you ask. So this global rank is likely incorrect based on those interpretations of the sand cherries. There are several sand cherries, Midwest, North, and Southeast. Nevertheless, in Tennessee, it's endangered. Low nut rush. This is another plant you just walk right by because it grows in between all the other spectacular looking plants. Not globally rare, special concern in Tennessee. This also grows in some of our cedar glade habitats in wet areas. And again, the tansy rosinweed that likes to grow in those calcareous barrens on the plateau escarpment also likes these wet prairies. And it's really happy at May Prairie. If they're the right time of year, the right year, you can really get a show. In the woods around the Highland Rim Prairie and Barrens, this is borderline whether it's in the prairie and barrens or not. It's in the zone, but it's more in the woods or the woodlands, the wet flat woods areas. Globally rare, G3, and endangered in Tennessee. And this is another one that been separated into several entities a couple of different times. There's been some recent work that I don't know if that's finalized or not. This could be more rare than a G3. We have at least 2 of those entities in Tennessee, but endangered is the rarest status, so we track them all as endangered. This is a newly described species, the Tennessee death camas, G2, threatened in Tennessee. It was lumped in with another species, and Bruce Story started looking closely at it, and ultimately this was described as a new species with a very narrow range. A coastal false asphodel, one of those coastal plain things, endangered. Another disjunct, Virginia goldenrod, G4, special concern. And here's a showy one, just so you can have something showy to look at, pink lady slipper. This is not on our main official rare plant list. It's on a watch list because it's commercially exploited. We're still keeping an eye on it. If I find a good population, good viable population, I'm still mapping those records and tracking them. So a couple of sedge, rare sedges, ferret sedge, and Bucksbaum's sedge. These are kind of like the iris, the slender blue iris. Suspect there's a lot more plants than we're seeing just because they're not happy. They're in denser forests than they would like to be. And hopefully with our management, we can see more of this come to light. Those two. The coyote thistle. Again, not globally rare, coastal plain thing, threatened in Tennessee. The really neat thing that you'll have to get close to see with your hand lens, this has blue anthers, indigo blue anthers. And then another thing they're calling a fern now, used to be called a fern ally, is foxtail club moss. Again, if it's happy, you'll see it look like this, but usually you'll just see one or two of those pipe cleaner-like things in between other things. And hopefully this shows you why Platanthera nivea is called snowy orchis, snowy orchid. Snowy looking petals, endangered in Tennessee, a G5, which that may change. We recently evaluated some species in the Southeast. A bunch of botanists got together in the Southeast and looked at these global ranks for some of these things. And although this is in a lot of counties along the coastal plain, apparently not a lot of those are really healthy populations. Thankfully, we have a pretty good population in Tennessee because we are actively managing it. This is a really close photo, so it looks, very showy, but in real life, this is a tiny flower. It's another one that you can walk right by. It's white, it's not bright orange or anything. You could easily miss this one among all the other plants. It is a Platanthera, so it has that long floral tube, not really long in this plant because it's so tiny, but something has to get its proboscis down to the end of that to get the nectar from that floral, that nectar structure. Again, I'll have links to this. You can go read this later, but in 2008, Dr. Dwayne Estes found a white aster at May Prairie that everyone else had walked right by, thought it was something else. He looked closer, and he sent some photos to people, including Dr. John Semple, who is an aster taxonomist. He recognized it as something related to a species that's in South Georgia and Florida, Symphiatricum fontanale. So its closest relative is on the coastal plain, but the only place it's found is in Tennessee. Again, just a white aster. Global rank of G1, proposed in danger. That's being finalized. Try to get that on the list. It is distinctive. It does look like quite a bit like Symphiatricum fontanale. And one of Dr. Estes's students, along with Dr. Robert Noxie, described a new beak sedge that occurs in Tennessee in the highland rim prairies and barrens, the stiletto beak sedge. And again, it grows in among all these other things. There's some of it down here. These little dark things are the fruit. There's the coyote thistle down next to it. Here's a specimen that former state botanist Claude Bailey collected 20th of July, 2004. It's not a showy plant, and people weren't looking closely enough at it. So I mentioned several times that these things need management, and here's an account from Edwin James, and he talks about fire and trees taking over the habitat, converting habitat. But he also talks about people taking over the habitat, and that's happening. So these red areas are the developed areas. The blue is Eastern Highland Rim Prairie Barrens, where the rare plants occur. There's some TDEC lands, including May Prairie, where we actively manage for these things. And then AEDC, that big area towards the bottom, and they have prescribed fires, and that benefits the plants. So we're trying to preserve these things, and this is the management. The primary method of management is prescribed fire. And just to show you what that kind of looks like on the ground, probably not a lot of people have seen prescribed fires as they happen. This is one of our staff members standing on a fire line. We clear out a line all around where we want to burn. We take all the fuel out of that, so when the fire gets to it, doesn't have an easy way to get across it. And we have staff putting out these little fires that look like they might get across it. This is the main fire as it's going across the unit. What we've already done here is on the back side of this unit, on the other side of this forest, there's another fire line, and the wind is blowing towards that fire line. So we have a crew that carefully went along that, lit a fire, watched it very carefully, make sure it didn't get across that line. And then it actually burns up the fuel in the direction of this one, so that when this fire gets all the way over there, it has nowhere to go. That's a big part of these prescribed fires and the way we keep them in bounds. So you can see it's burning some fuels here in the foreground, and these little woody things are what we're trying to suppress. We're trying to keep this from turning into a forest. Then it hits some bigger fuels and the flames get higher. And that generates a lot of smoke. This is what we really like to see. This is called good lift, when the smoke goes up instead of sideways. And sometimes we get a little smoke vortex.
Mhm.
We want to be good neighbors, so we really like to see this lift. When you get into the fire gets into the forest, the character of the smoke changes because the fuels change. It's burning oak leaves at this point, and that generates a real thick smoke. And we just watch it, make sure it's all gone. This is not a rare plant. This little white plume here, this is a plume grass. And as the fire goes through, this did not burn. It's up high for a reason, way up high. It's adapted to fire. So when the fire goes through, that humidity drops even lower and this fluffs out, and you get a little wind. These seeds go right down into this ground that's been prepared. You frequently see this species increase when we start burning, anywhere we start burning in the Central Basin where this plant occurs. It really likes fire. This is an oak tree, which we're not trying to get rid of oak trees, but the ones that are starting to rot anyway are susceptible. That does get towards our goals of thinning out that forest, so we can get those plants that like the open areas in there. As the day progresses on a prescribed fire, the humidity goes up and the fire activity goes way down sometimes, and you get this just little creeping fire that you have to just make sure it gets to that fire line and goes out. And this is what you end up with at May Prairie, which is shocking to people who don't know that there's been a prescribed fire. They see this and think, oh, there's been a disaster. But it's really good for the prairie. See these little black sticks in the foreground? That's what we're trying to get rid of. We're trying to get rid of those little woody plants. And fair warning, if you go to May Prairie, even late in the year, things will look really green, as you'll see in these photos coming up. If you wear light colored clothing, you will get black marks on your light colored clothing. And if you walk around a lot, you'll get a lot of black marks on your clothing. It's just like little charcoal sticks. This is an illustration of an area we used to not burn. We kept this unburned. It's called a refugia, but this has caused us a problem in the future. You can see all these little red maples and sweet gums coming up. And where it's burned, you don't see those. And just to further illustrate that, here's the unburned, lots of little trees. And right next to it, this is the burned area. Still seeing some trees, but not very many, because the fire selects against the woody stuff. But going back to this, once those trees get to a certain size, the type of fires that we run through there are not going to kill them. So we have to use other methods. We go in, break the cambium on the trees, whether just pruning it or other methods, and then we will spot treat every little woody stem we see with herbicide. Just a little, just dripping on each one of those stems. You can see on the left an area that's been treated, on the right is untreated. It made a big difference. This is the first time we tried this method, and we've been doing it ever since throughout the area. Here's the on the ground after the burn look at that low and high rolling landscape or rolling terrain that I showed in the GIS analysis, high in the background, low in the foreground. A lot of this is big blue stem, which is what was burning when you saw those really high flames. And hopefully that was hot enough to get rid of these little woody plants. And there's kind of a dividing line, low to high. And this is what it looks like after fire. This was the growing season after one of our fires. Lots of the tansy rosinweed, lots of liatris, but you still see sweet gum and red maple. And we'll never get rid of all of that, but we'll certainly keep working on it. Less and less woodies, more and more flowers. And this is the tansy rosinweed in a really good year. It got tall, flowers got tall. And just showing some of the diversity in the wet prairie. Butterflies like it. These little flowers, that's big blue stem flowers, tansy rosinweed. And this is what we're shooting for at the edge of the prairie. Trying to push these grasses and forbs into those woods. And as you get them into the woods, they burn. The next time you burn, a little further and a little further. There's a limit to how far we can get with just burning, but that's where we're headed. We want to see where that is. And because that benefits the rare plants, gives them more habitat to grow in. And we've already seen results from this, increases in several of those rare plants. This is looking down on the prairie, that same general area. You can see this area of yellow where the tansy rosinweed is. It's kind of the high spot. The low spot is in the foreground. Just looking a little closer, low and high. And here's kind of squatting down on the ground. This is the tansy rosinweed in the background. This is another rosinweed, these little yellow, pale yellow flowers. This is Silphium morii, which prefers a wetter ground. So you can kind of map out where those wet areas are just by showing up at the right time and seeing what Silphium is there.
Mhm.
That's the Silphium morii. It's got these pale yellow petals and fuzzy stem, fuzzy. Its center of distribution is not far from Coffee County, kind of in the zone where it grows, and it's not rare. Again, this is another forest edge where some of those rare plants like to grow, trying to push that. If you go to May Prairie in a drought year, you might see something like this. And if somebody were just driving by, you'd think this is just an old field, but it isn't spectacular every year. This is that September 2012 trip when we were looking at the aster for Dr. John Semple. Again, that's what you get after. Here's what you get. I mean, that's what you get after the fire. That's what you get the next growing season. And you can see a big tree or a limb in the background that has suffered from our management, and that's our goal. Even in the spring, there's some showy things in these wet prairies. That's a baptisia, royal fern. These are just flowers of the big blue stem. Wind pollinated, doesn't have to be showy. Some Joe Pye weed in one of the wet areas. This is that false asphodel. Again, it's kind of likes the edge of the woods, so hopefully we push that edge further back or make it less of an edge and more of a gradient. We'll get more of those. Butterflies. If you want to see butterflies at May Prairie, go late August, early September when these things are flowering, and go in the morning because it's late August and it's going to be humid and hot if you're there later in the day, and the butterflies don't like that either. So get there early and you'll see butterflies and flowers and you won't suffer as much.
Mhm.
And here's a shot going into the woodland edge with a lot of the false asphodel and liatris. This is kind of a sweet spot in the wet prairie, and really if we could get a lot more of that along the edge of those woods, that's kind of what we're looking for. Here's a Native Plant Society trip where Dr. Estes was leading a trip. Where everybody's pretty much clustered around him, but you can see a serious botanist in the background, really looking at something close. And this is part of that interpretation that the site was intended for when it was acquired. This is not May Prairie, just seeing if you're paying attention. This is Florida. There are lots of other things at May Prairie that are not rare, worth seeing though. Animals, other plants, showy plants, especially if you get up close with some of these things. All right, all of those were state listed species. I'm going to talk about some federally listed species. And a community that one of our federally listed species likes is the Cumberland Seepage Forest. Again, a lot of words, but the essentials are if you see red maple and black gum and a lot of ferns and sphagnum, and you're up on the plateau, you're very likely in a Cumberland Seepage Forest. And if you're in a Cumberland Seepage Forest and you see this running chain fern, the Viburnum nudum, and this particular sedge, you are in the habitat. You are in the best habitat for this plant within the Cumberland Seepage Forest. And the plant is the monkey tail orchid, Plotanther integralabia, and I'm calling it monkey tail orchid because Dr. Harry Yateman at the University of South called it monkey tail orchid, and he called it that because the local people called it that. Global rank G2, G3, Federally threatened, state endangered. Other rare plants in that habitat, Platanthera cristata, state threatened. Platanthera ciliaris, not rare in Tennessee, not globally rare. I've seen this growing almost like a weed on highways edge in North Carolina. Just right along the edge, 18-wheelers going by. Platanthera clavellata, the little woodland orchid. Here's what the plant looks like. If it flowers, you got this basal leaf, and then you've got leaves up the stem, of course, flowers. If it's not flowering, you'll either see this long strap-like leaf, or you'll see nothing. Orchids can continue to live underground. They can not come up in a year or 2 years or more. So you could be walking right across some orchids and not know it, no sign of it. And you could be walking across a lot of them. In one site where some plants were rescued, Atlanta Botanical Garden went in, got some plants, and discovered that for every flowering plant or plant visible above the ground, there were about 10 more that did not emerge. So you could be seeing 10 times, or you could be in a site with 10 times the number of plants that you can actually detect with your eyes. The habitat, as far as the topography goes, these stream heads, little concave areas, and this green lozenge represents the sphagnum. Sphagnum has a lot of water holding capacity, and these sites are almost like little bogs because that sphagnum stays wet for a long time after the rain has come through. Probably the ideal site for this plant is a forest with widely spaced trees, which you can kind of see here. This is a big site, lots of flowers. In a year where we don't get much rain, you'll see a normal amount of flowers, unless the year before was a drought year. This is a graph from data from a monitoring site. It's been monitored for many years. And in 2007, the drought of 2007, there was kind of a normal amount of flowering plants. But the next year, there was a precipitous drop, and it took it a while to recover from that. And that's because these plants are growing next year's plant. So whatever flowers this year was grown last year. Here's a site where a power line was abandoned. The site quality went down because there's a lot of woody growth. And then it got worse. This was cleared. It was opened up. A lot of grasses came in. Just not good for the orchids either. So too much shade, too much woody plants is bad. But clearing them, the zone is still intact, but the fact that everything around it was cleared opened it up, made it sunny, made it drier, made it less hospitable for the orchids. This is a site that was monitored for quite a few years. So y'all knew Tom Patrick. He observed several dozen plants in 1979, and there was a big increase in plants, and this was likely right around the time it was logged. So the plants got a lot of light, responded, and then because it was so open, the habitat really changed. So you can see the gradual decrease in 2011 and 2008. Plants were not observed. So the next plant community is the Southern Ridge and Valley Tricalcareous Forest. The key things to see here, it's dry to dry mesic, which mesic just means middle, in between dry and wet. Calcareous forest, which means there's a lot of limestone the limestone substrate. And this system actually encompasses the Squatchy Valley and the Cumberland Plateau. And that's what it looks like in real life. And the plant I'm about to talk about is this vine down below the word ridge. Jim Moorfield, when he was a young man, found a plant near Huntsville, took collected some, took it to Dr. Krall with some other specimens. Krall went back in 1983, collected more material, and then described it as a new species in 1987, Clematis moorfieldii. And in 1992, it was federally listed as an endangered species. And this is the Latin description, if you're into Latin. Taxonomists don't have to do this anymore. The rules changed several years ago. They can now do this in English or Spanish. It does not have to be in Latin, but that's the old school botany description of a plant. Fast forward to 2003, Dr. Dwayne Estes and his friend Chris Fleming discovered Clematis moorfieldii in Tennessee, previously unknown to the state, or not, because Henry Eggert was in the area of Franklin County in 1897, collected a plant that he called Clematis gattingeri, because one of the characteristics of Clematis gattingeri was a pubescence, and Clematis moorfieldii has that same kind of pubescence or small fine hairs on it. So it looks like Clematis moorfieldii was actually discovered in 1897 by Henry Eggert, who was a friend of Augustin Gattinger. They were both German, and Augustin Gattinger frequently traveled the rail lines. He kind of had a free pass to travel on the rail lines. And he may have told his friend, Henry Eggert, about this area where maybe he had seen some interesting plants. And Henry Eggert went in there and collected. This is what it looks like. These bracteolate leaves down near the base of the peduncle, that fine hair, pink and greenish, pale green flowers, globally rare, federally endangered, state endangered. That's what the fruit look like, these sort of golden plumose achenes. And this can stay on for a really long time, through the winter. I've seen it into the next spring, still on the plant, some sites. In Krall's description, he mentions that it occurs with Gypsinus ovavatus, which is smoke tree. In Tennessee, I only see that occasionally with Clematis moorfieldii. Some other rare plants that occur with it, some common associates. If I'm searching for it and I start seeing a lot of American beautyberry, I know I should go elsewhere, because that means it's a little too dry for Clematis moorfieldii. Again, this is good habitat for rattlesnakes. I see them quite a bit when I'm searching for Clematis moorfieldii. So what are we doing for these federally listed plants? For the orchid and the clematis and some other species, I've developed some predictive habitat models, which allows me to do more finding and less searching, or more finding when I'm searching. 10 new occurrences in about the last 14 years. No. Yeah, 14 years. And some of those acquisitions have led to, some of those finds have led to land acquisitions. The orchid, we're managing adjacent habitat with prescribed fire, and the clematis, we're just at this point, because we don't know how open we need to have it for the clematis before it's bad for it. So we're just kind of selectively removing some woody plants. There's some links to some of the information that I've been talking about, and then that BONAP link has maps for North America. You can look at all these, any species, look up its range in Tennessee. Any questions?
All right. Wow, that's a lot to digest,
I know, I told you.
but it's good. It's good.
You can always go back and look at it.
All right.
And I can tell you what I'll do. I'll put those links in the chat.
All right. Sharon Taylor says, we have healthy populations of Cyprinidum aculi on our rural property in Jackson County near Putnam County. And she says, my husband is an avid carnivorous plant enthusiast, propagator, and grower for many years. Did you ever find the green orophilia? Again in Tennessee. Only found once, and then professor couldn't find the site again.
Well, yeah, it's kind of a legend. There was allegedly there was a specimen and it got thrown away. So officially, we don't have proof, but it could have been in Tennessee, and people are looking for it. That's kind of, we get into a site that's really wet. Everybody says, oh, maybe we'll find the pitcher plant.
And yes, this was recorded or is being recorded, and it will be available in a few days from our TNPS website. Angela Carter asks, when is the other field trip to May Prairie besides April 1 and September 30th? And how often is it getting burned?
So one of those links that I put in the chat is the links to our natural areas events. I think the other trip is the May Prairie is in May, maybe. Can't remember, but it'll be in that schedule. I would have to look at the schedule as well. And we burn May Prairie when we can. I think it's maybe a 2 or 3 year goal. Every 2 or 3 years. It's what they want to do. But it's really a challenge with, we get rain at the wrong time now. We would prefer to burn it in the fall, but we've been getting some wet falls. They actually planned to burn today, but I think the weather changed. And from what I saw, maybe it was a little too much wind. So a prescribed burn has a prescription. So if you got too much wind, even with, fire lines and all of our controls, it's just too risky when you have high winds. So they, I think the word is pivoted today, and they burned at Flat Rock State Natural Area today.
Okay. Sharon Taylor expands her comments with it was found in Ventress County, and Carl talked with the son-in-law of the man who found it. I don't know if that helps.
Well, what somebody needs to do, I forget the guy's name. I think he had a dog called Cumberland Jack. He's a known figure in Tennessee sort of nature history. And he had some journals, and I think they're in the state archives. So it would be interesting if somebody got those from the state archives and kind of went through it, or not kind of, somebody went through it meticulously and looked to see if he documented that. That would add to the evidence, certainly.
Is May Prairie open to the public, and are there any trails?
Yes, to both of those. The parking lot is on Asbury Road. If you go to our website, there's all the information is there. And you can probably just Google May Prairie State Natural Area. Well, I know you can. You can Google May Prairie State Natural Area. That will be one of the top links. The trail there's a trick to the trail. That's what I'm leading up to here. The trail is pretty obvious at the beginning, but it goes through the wet flatwoods, and then it gets to a woodland. And when you get to that woodland, it crosses one of our former fire lines, and you just have to look ahead of you to see where the open area is. You can see through the forest, and on a sunny day, not as clear on a cloudy day, sunny day, you can see the opening in the forest. And one of them is something we call the Haggard Tract. So as you're coming out of that wet flat woods, it'll be towards the left, and May Prairie will be more directly in front of you. There is still a trail, but as we manage and trees fall and a little erosion happens, that trail from the woodland edge to the prairie is getting less and less clear.
Bob Davis says TVA power line right-of-ways are often cleared by TVA. These areas are good to look, but every so often now they clear them with weed killers.
The TVA is aware of the rare species, and they have a process that's been improved. It gets better and better. I know, and Larry knows, a botanist. Larry's done some work for TVA. He knows all this. The contractor, so the ones that are doing the spraying are a contractor. Contractors have locations for the rare species, and at the I've forgotten what they classified them as. They got a name for them, these rare plant sites. At those sites, they are not supposed to spray them from the air, which is what the contractors do for the most part. They are supposed to show up with a botanist and then spot treat those woody plants around the rare plant locations. In the past, that's not always happened, but that's why they've made improvements to the process. And they're very much aware of the rare plants, and they've partnered with us on some projects to benefit rare plants in those power lines. So some good things have happened out of those past problems. So I saw the deer question. Did you see the deer question?
I did, and people keep writing in and things jump on me and I lost it. But yes, there was a question about the deer.
Yeah, do they pose a threat to rare plants in Tennessee? And the answer is yes. I had a lot of pictures. I could have put yet another picture of the white fringeless orchid, what most people call it, what I call monkey tail orchid. They eat the flowers just like candy. So some sites you go in to monitor a site, and there's a mature plant with the stem leaves, the basal leaves, but no flower, just little cut marks at the top. And I've been told that eventually that can kill a plant if that keeps happening. But certainly not good to have deer stomping around in those habitats. I've seen some where they just congregate. They're not even eating the plants. They're just stomping all over. So yes, deer definitely pose a threat to rare plants.
Sharon Taylor comments, the man's name was James Sharp, and it was found back in the 30s. Lynn Davis asks, where were the pitcher plants you showed?
I'm trying to remember what county, but it's in Apalachicola National Forest. So some of these plants that are rare in Tennessee, common on the coastal plain, they're, roadside ditches in Apalachicola National Forest. That photo was not a roadside ditch, but the grass-leaved arrowhead and things like that. You're just driving down the road and they're just outside your window everywhere.
When you showed the picture of the TNPS group, when was that taken? I think I found myself in the middle of it.
Yeah, I think that was an annual meeting trip, and I don't remember what year. We've gone to May Prairie for more than one annual meeting.
Yes, it
But it
looked like
was,
I found myself in the middle.
yeah, it was while Dwayne was still a student. He was not yet had completed his PhD. He was still in school. So that would have been maybe 05, 06, maybe earlier than that. I don't know. I don't know, Alex. I can find out.
Thank you.
All right. Sharon Taylor comments, I'm a trillium lover. What trillium species are in Tennessee? Common and scientific names, please.
There are a lot of trilliums, and
Right.
if you go to that BONAP site, you can see all the trilliums in North America. But there are things happening in trillium, not just that dwarf trillium fusilum. Dr. Schilling at UT and Dr. Floden at Missouri Botanical Gardens are doing some work with trilliums and doing genetic work. So we may have some new information on trilliums in Tennessee. I'm not sure how broad their study is, maybe the Southeast. So I guess the answer is there are more trilliums than we know.
And a lot of them are listed in our TNPS Wildflowers of Tennessee book.
Yes, probably the most, well, definitely the rarest, and one of the most interesting is Trillium tennesseeense, which is known only from 2 counties in Tennessee.
Oh, okay.
And is not on protected lands. So that
Which counties?
Hawkins, Hawkins.
But it's somebody's property, right?
Yeah, it's on private lands.
So you need to probably get permission for that.
Yes, yes. But if you look at the pictures, look up Trillium tennesseeense and, well, just look up Trillium tennesseeense and look at the pictures. There's some really good photos online. It's really distinctive. So if you're up in the Ridge and Valley and you happen to be somewhere that people have not looked for it before, Dr. Floden, Dr. Schilling searched a couple of times for it, pretty intensively searched for it in the area. Did not find, they found some more, but they didn't find a lot. It's really distinctive. It'd be something to be on the lookout for, especially if you know somebody with a lot of land up there. Might be worth a visit to your friend in the spring.
If anybody else has a question, you can please unmute and ask away. Any other questions?
Karen, I have a question. When I saw you at the Lawn and Garden Show, you said the TNPS newsletter had been mailed out, and I haven't received mine.
Okay, the online version is, the digital version is on the website,
Okay.
so you can at least get it there. And I
Okay.
can email you a copy too.
Okay, but it was mailed out?
Yes, it was mailed out that Friday.
Yeah. Okay, I paid my membership dues, but I didn't get it.
Okay, I'll check
Thank-
it. Well, Bart, between us, we can look into it.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
What causes trilliums with multiple leaf whorls?
Uh,
I've seen up to like 15 leaves on a trillium.
yeah, variation. That's an interesting phenomenon. That's natural variation. Bart could probably talk more about that than I would. He's more into the genetic side of things. But basically, it's a little mutation, whether that's natural or unnatural. There's some things in the environment that could cause plants to mutate, but it's just a little flipped a gene. And the interesting thing about it is, or one of the interesting things about it is, in Asia, there's a related genus called Paris, just like the city, Paris. And their flower parts and plant parts are in what, 4s, 6s, I think up to maybe 10. So that's in the ancestry or in the heritage that there could be more parts. It's that potential is there. You just have to know which little allele to flip to make it happen.
In Speranthus ovalis has been found in Bedford County on my property and has been reported to your government. Speranthus ovalis, because it has leaves, as other Speranthus do not, many of the others do not have leaves at blooming time. The size, gone,
I said, yes, correct.
and the size of the bloom, if I measure the white part, is 4 millimeter, the white part. And you have also probably received a picture of the seed part, which is cleistogam, so it will fertilize itself without, and so, but the seeds fly away, and I have not personally found any nucleus in the seeds. This is Bedford County.
All right.
Okay, I failed to hit enter when I sent those links in the chat earlier. It's in there now.
Okay.
And I just put one to the Trillium page for the vascular plant database, where you can see all the Trillium of Tennessee with links to maps and photos.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Diana Stevens comments, Wilson County is home to many Trillium patches out and about limestone rock piles of farmers. Look for forested areas in the middle of farm fields. And Sharon Taylor says, we have toadshade Trillium on our rural property in Jackson County. So, lots of good information. I would like to make sure everyone knows that the Tennessee Native Plant Society's annual meeting and conference will be held at the Cedars of Lebanon State Park for this year, the first weekend of May. And our Friday nights, one of our Friday night speakers, again, will be Todd Crabtree. So if you want to hear more from Todd, come to the conference, which is coming up soon. You can register online, or you can send in mail in a registration form, either way. All right. Any other questions before we say goodnight? And for those of you who really want to copy those, you can copy and paste all those links, or you can take your phone out and snap a little picture of it, or you can do a screen save. All those 3 options are available. All right, any other questions before we say goodnight? All right, without any questions then, I'm going to say goodnight, everyone. And I'll look forward to seeing everyone at our next seminar, which is a month away. And that one will be about lichens. We will have the author of a lichen book, the lichen book for the Smoky Mountains. She's out in Colorado, so we've had to do some juggling getting our times coordinated.
Mountain time.
Yes. All right. Well, I want to say good night to everyone. It's been wonderful to see all your lovely faces and hear your questions. And then Todd, that was a really wonderful presentation.
Good.
Lots of good pictures and lots of information.
Yeah.
I think we'll be using the recording on this one a lot. All right. Good night, everyone.